question about training zones. An athlete just purchased the 70.3 Couch 2 program, joined the Facebook group, and her question was, I have loads of questions, but I think my first is, how do I actually know which zones are which? I'm watching your YouTube videos, so I'm sure I'll find something there. We've covered this in those videos, but it's a good refresher. Go ahead.
Yeah, so training zones can be, a training zone can be monitored in heart rate, power, pace, rate of perceived effort. Everyone is going to use something different. Sometimes athletes are going to use all of them. Sometimes athletes are going to be like, I don't use power or heart rate. What's RPE? RPE is rate of perceived effort, and there's a scale on of 1 to 10. And I comment on that, and we've done videos and explain what all these training zones, how you can monitor them with those metrics. Now, how you determine them is generally the best to do like some baseline data, and we include an example of the baseline data. Most of the time we include that in first week of our training plans, but for the Couch 2 programs, they're usually in week 4 or week 8. And you do like a functional threshold power test if you're training by power. You do a 1.5 mile to 3 mile run test, and you do a 500 to 1K swim test. At the best effort you have for that day. And then generally your average power, heart rate, pace for that test is your what's called a zone 4. That's zone 4 is your threshold. And then you can plug that number into Training Peaks and it'll do the rest of the calculations, zone 1, 2, 3, and 5. I tend to use a 5-zone scale. There's other scales out there that use 3 zones. Some coaches, some programs will use 6 to 8 zones. So I'm usually going by a 5-zone scale, which was I learned about from Joe Friel back in 1997. So that's just something I've learned and it works for me. And so it's just following training zones, whether you use pace, heart rate, power, or rate of perceived effort. It's just a way to monitor intensity and kind of keep you in check and provide you a lot of feedback. For example, if you're out on a hot day and your heart rate is very high that day, it could just be not from your intensity. It could be from the weather. The heat's going to increase your heart rate. So if you're monitoring your rate of perceived effort and you're in the correct endurance zone, say a RPE of 4 or 5, even though your heart rate's high, it's just a way to give you feedback. And the more feedback you learn from as you follow the guidelines, the better the more fit you're going to become, because you're going to have an understanding of what it's like to go hard, moderate, and easy.
Do you personally have a favorite type of metric for yourself?
RPE, rate of perceived effort, always. I don't like to be dictated by heart rate. So back when I started these in the early 90s, I got a heart rate monitor, and I actually was a swimmer in college. And my parents bought me a heart rate monitor after my first season of triathlon. So I wore my heart rate monitor, didn't know a thing about it. It was years before I really understood what the zones were. I just thought it was cool to look at my heart rate when I was training and when I was resting, but I had no idea how to use it until I read Joe Friel's cycling training Bible in 1997. And so heart rate for me was a gold standard back then. They didn't have GPSs, so I didn't monitor pace or anything like that. I just used a regular Timex digital watch. Mm-hmm. And then, when I started running more trails and more hills, heart rate became less effective for me because your heart rate's going to go high. Even if you run up a hill easy, your heart rate's going to elevate. And when you run downhill, your heart rate's going to decrease. So then I started learning more about power. And then when I got my first bike power meter in 2014, power is definitely the gold standard for me while I'm training on the bike. And I also had a power meter for running, and I used that for a few years. But like I said, when I started running more trails and more mountains up and down, the power meter and running became less of a thing for me because it was just too hard to monitor on such varied terrain. But I've always used rate of perceived effort. So now when I train bike or run, usually on bike by power, I use that as feedback. I still go by effort as I monitor my power. And I can say, oh, today my effort was a 6 and my power was really high. That's exciting. But I race by effort. I collect the data and then I analyze it in the end.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
How about you?
I think it's constantly juggling all of them as they're coming in. Bike, it's going to be power specifically, heart rate. It depends on how long the ride is, but I kind of know where it's going to be. And then when it comes to running, it's heart rate for me because I'm a little bigger of an athlete. I'm trying to lose some weight, but I'm a little bigger of an athlete, so I know that it's my heart has to work harder. But I know if I get a little lighter in pounds, then I'll go a little faster. So pace is going to be relative to probably my body weight and fitness. But if I can stay within a certain heart rate, then I know based on VO2 max testing and those kind of things that if I get to a certain point, I only have so much longer to go before my body cramps up. So the heart rate kind of tells me, all right, stay within this range because if you go any faster, lactate's going to build up, you're going to cramp, you won't be able to maintain it. And heat is an issue. I'm not a great hot weather runner, although some of that I think is in my head, but that's an area that I want to work on in the future. So cycling is the power watts for sure, and then running, I'm watching heart rate, and everything else will kind of work within that. If I can lower my heart rate and go faster, great, then the pace is going to adjust. But if I can lower my heart rate and be fitter, then it'll all work out, I think.
Yeah, and I think in the end, the number one thing is let's say you do a 30-minute run and you cover 3 miles and your average heart rate is 150. And then 2 months from now, you do a 3-mile run at an average heart rate of 150, but you run 27 minutes. That's a sign of fitness.
Great, yeah,
perfect. You ran faster at the same heart rate for 3 miles.
Yep.
And so monitoring your zones is a way to measure your fitness. Hopefully you're getting more fit, but it's also a way to tell you, okay, things aren't going the right way. You need to change the plan and figure things out.
And there's something called cardiac drift, if you've heard that, where the heart rate starts to go lower and you're just not responding well. Something's wrong. You're like on a hot day, and it's like I'm going harder and harder and harder, but my heart rate's dropping. Something's wrong. Whether I'm not hydrated, energy's gone. There's different things that will impact your heart rate too. Whether it's the weather,
right?
Yeah,
right. It's just again, I like to stress it's just they're really good feedback tools: the power meter, the GPS, and the heart rate.